Colleagues and friends, good afternoon. I am Donatella Ponziani, ESA Downstream Gateway Officer, and I welcome you to the webinar Climate Care, Remote Life, Better Life. In 2020, the Earth has been struck by the attack of coronavirus. Governments from every country are struggling to win an unprecedented battle against this invisible enemy. Solidarity and care are concerned. Thinking global, acting local is a must. Being disruptive is no longer an action. The European Space Agency is very active to support the better life on Earth. In front of the emergency towards its programs, it's a leading action leveraging on its own space assets and space downstream solution to support the management of the crisis. But one question dawned on us: how will be the day after? In order to better identify and discuss potential future scenarios, ESA is organizing a series of webinars, putting together experts from different fields, using collective intelligence and expertise to build together the Earth of tomorrow. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor to be the moderator for the first webinar, and I would like to introduce to you our panelists. Jan Werner is a Director General who is hosting us. Joseph Aschbacher is a Director of Earth Observation Programs. Jacob Blaisel, climate activist from Friday for Future. Alfredo Roma, economist. And Paolo Vineis, Chair Professor of Environmental Epidemiology at the Imperial College in London. I thank them all for their availability, their time, and for being with us today. We are going to have in front of us about 1 hour discussion, live discussion. And I would like to start straight away with the first question to our Director of Earth Observation Programs, Joseph Aschbacher. Joseph, hello, good afternoon. What can space tell us about the effect of coronavirus crisis?
So thank you, Donatella, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here at this panel. Climate care is a very important topic, and that's something that is very close to my heart. As mentioned, I'm the Director of Earth Observation, and Earth Observation has to do with satellites that look at our planet, see how healthy our planet is. We use the slogan or the motto, we are taking the pulse of our planet with our satellites from space. And this is really what we do. So these satellites are measuring the various aspects of the Earth system. That means the atmosphere, the oceans, the land surface, the polar regions, and see how they interact and how these various parameters are depending on each other. A very simple example, if there is pollution in the atmosphere, obviously this has an impact on the land surface. This has an impact on the oceans. So there's global rising of the ocean level. It has an impact on the ice caps. They are unfortunately melting. So this is really what we are doing. We look with our satellites and see how the Earth system works, first to understand it, but also how it affects, or how the climate change is affecting our system. First of all, to understand, to monitor, but also to help.
Joseph, you have been muted. Sorry to interrupt you. You have been muted.
Okay. Is this working?
Now it's working.
Okay. I don't know which level it was interrupted, but maybe just to recall very briefly that our satellites do monitor the various elements of our Earth system. That means the atmosphere, the oceans, the land surface, the ice caps, and see how they interact. First of all, really to understand how the Earth system works as a system, but also to help with this information citizens, politicians, decision makers, to make good judgment and good decisions of this information which we are putting together based on satellite data. And this is something quite essential. In fact, in Europe, we are building up one of the world-leading Earth observing systems. Copernicus is one element of it, not the only one, which is using satellite data to monitor the state of our planet. But also The satellites, Earth Explorers we call them, which are more science-driven satellites, are making measurements of our planet with novel technologies that are not flying yet and which are needed to understand better our system. So what are we offering from the ESA side for climate? Obviously, our task is to develop satellites, and we are a space agency, so therefore satellites are the key asset which we can provide and which we can contribute. And obviously the data which we are deriving from these satellites and information which is derived again from the satellite data. And there we have a large number of these data which are converted to information which we are using. For example, there are globally something the order of 50 what we call ECVs, essential climate variables. About half of them you can measure either only or best from space because the satellites have a global view and they measure these parameters. Examples are sea level rise, ocean temperature, land temperature, melting of the glaciers, melting of the ice caps, and parameters like these. Obviously, atmospheric pollution is a key parameter as well, which is regularly monitored. Talking of atmospheric pollution, this is obviously the key parameter which is important and which everyone looks at. CO2 is one of the most prominent gases, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and we measure those also from space. As you all know, CO2 has been at a level of 290 ppm, parts per million, before the Industrial Revolution. Now we have more than 400, 410 or even above. There's an annual cycle, but these levels keep increasing, and that is no good news. Some people are asking me, especially journalists, is the COVID crisis now reducing the emission of CO2, and does this heal our planet and save our planet? The answer, unfortunately, is no. Of course, there's a short improvement of the quality of air, and we can see this very clearly. We have been showing very nice measurements also published on the web stories of NO2, which is a pollution, a gas which is polluting the atmosphere and which is linked to traffic and industry. And those values have been going down quite drastically by about 50% over the areas which had lockdowns during COVID. However, CO2 is at very high level, and I'm very happy to see also Jakob in our round, who will certainly confirm that CO2 is the main concern of the generation looking at climate change. And this gas is at 410 ppm. So if you are reducing, or if you are having a lower CO2 emission for, say, 3 months or however long the COVID crisis will last, that's good. It's good for your air you breathe. But the climate, I'm afraid, will certainly not be improving quickly and drastically because of that. And this is the bad news. Sometimes I use another comparison. If somebody is a chain smoker and is smoking 3 packs of cigarettes every day, that's bad for your body. But if you stop smoking for 2 months or 3 months, that doesn't save you. You still are a smoker. Your lung and your respiratory system are still affected. And this is a bit the same with CO2 emissions. Yes, CO2 is still polluted. Yes, now the pollution is reduced. But when we go out of the lockdown, again, we are afraid we go back to the same levels. And the CO2 level in general is still at 410 ppm, and therefore is something that worries us a lot. So I'm also hoping, and I'm happy to see Jakob speaking after me, I'm also hoping that at least through this reduced pollution and therefore a better knowledge, and I would also say a better realization of clean air and what a better air quality can mean, that this triggers a change of thought in the people, and therefore triggers maybe some actions that in the future, when we reinvest, and we have to reinvest, we have to get out of the lockdown, there's no question, there's no doubt, and this has to happen, which is sooner rather than later. But these investments in the lockdown and stimulus packages have to be done in a very sustainable way, with climate as a #1 priority, which we have to preserve, or which we have to look after when we make all these investments. Thank you.
You're muted, Donatella. Donatella, you're muted. Donatella, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I start again. I tried to unmute without any success. So now I would like again to thank Joseph for this explanation. It was very clear. So we have to, the results are good, but they are not, we have to still think about it. Now I would like to switch and to Jacob, who is with us. You are a young activist, climate activist from Friday for Future, and would like to ask you, what is your view on climate change and the impact on Earth for the planet and human life?
So I became a climate activist because I was concerned about the situation, and I was concerned about how the government treats the climate crisis and acts with it. And so I became a climate activist in 2018 and started with Fridays for Future and so on and on and on. And we've been striking since then, because the government is, in Germany at least, is acknowledging the climate crisis, but that they are not taking it seriously, and they are not treating it as a crisis, more like as one of their many tasks they have to do. And the same thing in Europe, like the European Union does something against the climate crisis, has the Green New Deal prepared, but they are not putting up the targets higher, and they are not like they are not making the Green New Deal as good and as big as it would have to be. So the governments in the world are really failing us right now, or in at least in terms of the climate crisis. And so it's getting more difficult for us as activists to get this message out, since we can't protest anymore because of the corona crisis.
So you are pointing out that there is an insufficient action of the governments on climate crisis. The COVID pandemic caused the cancellation of the COP26. How do you think it will impact the climate care, and to which extent?
I think it will impact the climate care internationally and in many nations, but it shouldn't and it can't impact the climate care. So especially in terms of new global targets and emission goals, we have to enhance those, and we can only enhance those if the EU acts right now and China will follow. So those are the key player to get the whole world running and get the whole world having bigger and more ambitious goals in terms of emission reduction. So we really have to right now get the EU engaged and ask the leaders of our nations and of each nation to get a higher emission cut goal by 2030. And we have to get that at the middle of this year already. So we can't wait more than 2 or 3 more months. So that's really critical, and a lot of leaders will take the COP, who's not happening this year, as an excuse to just stop their climate actions, and they can't and they shouldn't, because the corona crisis maybe gives the climate crisis less attention, but the climate crisis is still fatal and is still as fatal as it was before. So we really have to treat 2 crises at the same time. So the government has to act against the corona crisis, but also has to keep up their plans in terms of emission reduction right now. And that's a big task for the EU, but China and all other nations will have to follow.
Thank you, Jacob. I think you put a good introduction to Professor Paolo Vinese, who is a chair professor of environmental epidemiology. Paolo, a question comes to my mind is, but let's talk about planetary health. What is the impact of climate change on human health? And if I may, what is the impact? Can we say something about the impact on pandemic outbreaks?
Yes, okay. Planetary health is a terminology that that is used now by many people, also in the academia and by researchers, to stress the fact that there is a very direct link and connection between the health of the planet and the human health. And we can point at several examples. One is epidemics. We are stressing the planet, we are stressing the environment in many ways. One example is deforestation and also farming, extensive farming. Both are associated with increased interactions and contacts between either wild species in the forests or animals that are bred in farms. And the consequence of that is a greater frequency and also severity of epidemics, which may become pandemics. Now, in this specific case of COVID-19, there is basically no proof of the fact that, no evidence of the fact that this is related to, say, let's say, climate change or deforestation. It seems to have been a kind of a casual contact between bats and people say pangolin. I'm not completely sure. Maybe that the very start of the phenomenon was not related to deforestation or the damage we pose, we create in the environment, but on many other occasions, like the flu pandemics, for example, or Ebola and others, a link between deforestation or misuse of land it has been found, has been demonstrated. So what I'm saying is that mistreatment of the planet also has an impact on human health. By damage to the planet, I refer, for example, to the analysis by Rockström and the Stockholm Resilience Center. They have said for many years, at least from 2009, but also before, that we are stretching the resilience of the planet. That is, we are overcoming the limits of the planet to recover the ability of the planet to recover from damage. And apparently we have already overtaken the some of these limits, like the nitrogen or phosphorus cycles or genetic diversity. Just to give an example of the interplay between planetary changes and planetary health and human health, we have done research in Bangladesh. And by the way, I come to the topic of satellites as well, because we have been using satellites to monitor climate change in Bangladesh and also air pollution. There we observed, among other phenomena, an impact of sea level rise, that is a changing frequency of floods, but also salinization of drinking water due to sea level rise and the change in the melting of Himalaya glaciers. So this work has been done with field research, but also with the use of satellites. And it shows that there is a very close interplay and interaction between environmental changes, climatic changes, and human health, which leads to the central policy in principle of the different COPs from Paris on, probably, which is called the co-benefits policy. And I agree with the previous speaker that it is really, I would say, unacceptable that Glasgow is postponed. postponed because I was hoping that this policy, which is called co-benefits, which was central in Madrid, would be carried over to Glasgow and the following COPs. There is the need for urgent action. Co-benefits means that if you act in a certain sector, let's make the example of agriculture, you obtain many benefits. For example, as I said, pig farms create a risk of epidemics, H1N1, for example, but also they imply a lot of land use and water use with an impact on the environment. And then they have an impact on human health. Well, I said it already, but they also release a lot of greenhouse gases because farming contributes for at least 14% to greenhouse gases. So if you act on agriculture and also dietary habits like reducing the intake of meat, you get benefits in different fields for the environment and health, human health. Do I still have some time? Yeah, okay, right. So you raised the issue of COVID, and I didn't respond. Yes, I don't think there is any connection between climate change and COVID directly. Climate change is not causal for the COVID epidemic, but it is indirectly related because we know that the severity of COVID is related to the background of the individuals, like the severity is higher in people with heart diseases, diabetes, obesity, hypertension. Now, some of these diseases are also epidemic. There is an epidemic of diabetes in the world. And this is another environmental challenge, more related to dietary habits and lack of physical activity, but still it is within the concept of environment, particularly the urban environment. So I would say that environmental changes, including climate change, create a background that makes a phenomenon like COVID more serious. For example, the heat waves we went through due to climate change were very severe. There were 70,000 deaths in 2003, if you remember. Now, what happens if we have heat waves during the COVID epidemic? I think that there will be a very strong interaction between the two, and particularly for the most deprived sectors of population.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting, and there is a lot of food for thought. I would like now to attack the problem from another point of view, the point of view of economist. And I would like to ask a question to Alfredo Roma, who is with us. He's an economist. Alfredo, what can we learn from the economic point of view on the COVID crisis and link it possibly to climate change, a better sustainable economy? What are the challenges in front of us?
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Yes, I will start seeing what we are learning at the moment from as consequences of the coronavirus, and see what we can do in the future for a sustainable economy. And I'm referring especially to the European economy. What we expect is certainly a shrinkage of all economic activities in this moment, except from some sectors like food and pharmaceutical or some other minor sector. Many small companies will despair, wind up, or acquired by larger companies, leading to a consolidation in various sectors. One of these is just the air transport. The air carriers will suffer losses estimated now between $63 and $113 billion. They are the weak link of the air transport value chain because they suffer the highest competition. Since a long time, the European airlines need a consolidation, and probably this is the moment that it will happen. There are no problems for airport and air traffic control because the other two ring of the value chains are a sort of monopoly. Also, the cancellation of orders for new aircraft will affect the results of aircraft producers like Airbus and Boeing, so affecting the air transport again. We expect, in general terms, a reduction in consumption for fear of future similar situation, at least for a few years, in particular for tourism, for entertainment, luxury, and non-necessary products. Investment for space. Last February, the United States announced an investment of $35 billion for space activities. Now, we don't know whether this will be maintained, and we don't know about the budget of other countries, whether it will be maintained or not. Education from remote, this is an important item, has shown that families having no computer or Wi-Fi connections, they are excluded from education and culture. And education and culture are the most important assets of a country. So many countries, I believe, in the future should invest in information technology, not only for schools, but also for economic activities. A question has been raised whether remote life is a better life. Okay, it is difficult to say. In Europe, in the southern countries of Europe, there is a lot of a larger social life at work and privately, much less than in the northern countries of Europe, also for climate reasons. Smart working offers advantages and disadvantages. Less cost for enterprises that need less premises and equipment, less pollution for less traffic, more time for personal hobbies. We should ask a psychologist. The question is, life with less social life relations could lead to mental depression. Actually, we have had some example in these days. Before examining any possible future European economic scenario, we should consider two variables. The first one is the future American foreign economic policy. In the last few years, the American administration has created problems to the world trade and has imposed custom duties to many European products and sanctions on Iran. That is an important part for many European companies. They have also supported somehow movements acting against the European Union, like Brexit. There are no doubt that the United States, Russia, and China would be happy to see the dissolution of the European Union. The second variable is just the future of the European Union. Will be the coronavirus an occasion for strengthen or for weaken the Union? The European member states should understand that if the European Union had a constitution as United States of Europe, they would be the strongest economic power in the world. But this would imply a common fiscal policy, the dissolution of the Council of Europe, that is a duplication of the Commission, producing only a slowing down of the decision process of Europe. And finally, a common European economic, defense, and foreign policy. Future action, what could we do for the future, taking into consideration of the agenda of the United Nations 2030? The extreme concept of free market developed in the 80s and supported by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan has created enormous damage to the world economy, favoring the financial speculations and above all creating social inequalities. That is one of the main reasons why the economy of the Western countries does not grow properly in the last 20 years. To this subject, I suggest to read the very interesting book of Atkinson and Piketty. Personally, I think we should go back to the principle of John Maynard Keynes that marked the economy the economic and social recovery after the great crisis of 1929, and has also favored the creation of the social European welfare after the Second World War. For Keynes, the state must have a role to support the economy and ensure a market balance. It must create public investment to reach full employment, granting a dignified work to everybody, and a welfare which include also the health protection. It must favor private investment while maintaining a certain control of the strategic activities or services like transport, space, and telecommunications. To Keynes' principle, we could add it must grant a qualified education to everybody. It must develop in clean energy sources, and must invest in environment economy that is producing profit, that improve the ecosystem. Finally, it must invest in space activities and infrastructures. In this particular situation, space infrastructures like Copernicus, Galileo, telecommunications, satellite, the International Space Stations, can help to examine the diffusion of the pandemic and find a correlation between the spread and the climate situation, density of population, active transport means, and this can reduce the human and economic impact. Investment in space produce consistent employment, and this could help to substitute the activities that will be cancelled by the pandemic. They are also providing new technologies and services as in the past, like telecommunications, security, navigation, telemedicine, new scientific discovery we have got from space activities. It has been proven that investment in space have had a very high return. So in the end, I think that what it should be done by the European, this is what it should be done by the European Union and the European member states to provide a sustainable development after the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you, Alfredo, for this extensive overview on the actual economic situation and potential way forward. I would like to ask to Jan the following question. We have been talking about climate change, the impact on Earth. I would like to ask, how can space help in this situation and in the future?
Thank you very much, Donatella, and good afternoon to everybody. What can space do? Let's have a short analysis of what we are talking. We are talking about COVID-19, and we are talking at the same time about climate change. Is there anything in parallel? Yes, there is a lot, because in both cases it's something like a black swan, which was described in 2007 by Nicolas Taleb. A black swan means that something happens which was not foreseen in that sense. Okay, there were some ideas about the pandemic, but in general terms, it was really a sudden action we observed. And therefore, what is very important is the very first point, and this is discovery. And to discover something, you can get only by curiosity. So this is the basis value of all what we are talking today. We are talking about consequences here and there and all of this. But to be very blunt and honest, the basis is curiosity, because only with curiosity you are ready to discover something. In case of climate change, it was a curiosity to learn about the planet Venus. And on Venus, the climate change is much stronger than on Earth. So it was a space mission, a discovery mission to the planet Venus, which discovered climate change. And COVID, it's the same, more or less the same. Somebody was ill suddenly in China. And then you had to discover what is the reason, what is the source for the illness. And it was the virus. So discovery is a very basic activity. And this is something space is really all the day by day doing. We are really feeding curiosity, and we need curiosity to go forward. The second step is monitoring. Monitoring is very important. We heard it from Joseph concerning Earth observation of climate change. By Earth observation, by monitoring, we know we take the pulse of our planet. And only by that we understand really, making out of data, making information out of data, we understand what is happening with our planet. It's the same with COVID-19. By monitoring the worldwide spreading of the virus, we understood very rapidly how fast it can spread. And we understood also that it's not so easy to counteract, to fight against it. So in both cases, and this is a very strong logic for space activities, monitoring is of utmost importance. The next step is raising awareness. And again, in climate change, the raising awareness was the important aspect, that people understand what is happening with our tiny blue dot. And with COVID, it was important to raise awareness that people understand that the lockdown is very important in order to save lives. So it's raising awareness in both cases. And then, and only then, you can really go to mitigation, protection, or even counteracting. This is quite different, of course, for climate change and for COVID-19. But it's the logic, again, discovery, raising awareness, then discovery, monitoring, raising awareness, and then finally counteracting, mitigation. So what can really space do in both cases? So in the case of climate change, we heard we are observing, we are monitoring, but we are also trying to do things really to reduce the climate change. For instance, when we are using telecommunication, navigation, and Earth observation at the same time, to have the airplanes flying in a height and on a route where the contrails are minimum. And contrails are a source also for climate change. So therefore, this is a very clear and direct impact space can have. But also to have better routes in air and on Earth to avoid traffic jams. And also to have, instead of just the fastest route or the shortest route, to have the greenest route, whether it's in space, in air, or whether it's on the surface for cars. And then also new technologies come from space. The solar cells, which are now used for to transfer the sun energy into electricity, they come from space, and it's in space that we have the highest efficiency of solar panels, because we need them when we go to special places in the universe. So it's also technology. So space is helping in the case of climate change by technology, by using space in order to be better in the future. Now, if you look to the COVID, what can really in COVID-19, what can space do? So there is one thing is, of course, we are observing it again, what is happening with industry, etc. But also we are producing with our technology now PPE, that means special technologies which are helping the people, for instance, to protect the face, but also, for instance, to have ventilators. And then telemedicine is now, which ESA and space is it's a traditional instrument, is now used also for COVID-19. For instance, when Luca Parmidano came back last year from space, all the telemedicine was used to get his physical status even before he was in the hospital, to understand of him. And then also astronauts are really masters of confinement. By asking them, we can understand what is the best, how to behave, what to do in order that the confinement is not such a very big psychological threat towards us. So space can help. Space can also try to give us information about what is happening. But there is a final point I would like to mention, and that is the effect on society. If you see what is happening with COVID-19, if you see what is happening with the climate change, one could be very depressed. And depression is not a good father for the future or good mother for the future. We need motivation, that is for sure. even in difficult times, we need motivation. And space can, by producing fascination and inspiration, can also produce motivation for people to work something, to work for the future. Of course, based on all the information space can deliver, but that means really to have an individual interest in developing the future. So I believe space can help a lot, and space is helping a lot. So we are not saying you have to do that, you have to do that, you have to do that. We are saying it's us who are doing something. And therefore, I think space is really, in this very catastrophic situations we are observing, is a very good instrument for society. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for your intervention. Actually, we have just received one question, which is more than a question, comment from Twitter that is linked to what you are saying. The comment is, at the time of lockdown, should we promoting the resilience of space-based solution at observation, navigation, and communication satellites continue operating, and many services are automated, delivering regardless of the situation at large? I think that you have just answered to this comment in your intervention, but would you like to add something to that?
Yes, thank you, Donatella. I believe it's very important, especially in a crisis like Corona, that we have the information we need also for the future. We cannot lock down all the information part. We cannot lock down the navigation. We cannot lock down telecommunication. And therefore, when we went to teleworking and to really send people home more than 2 months ago, it was at the very beginning, at the very first day, it was clear that we will continue with what we called critical tasks. So we asked people, of course, a very small number only, to continue also on-site work where necessary. For instance, for the operation of the satellites, for instance, also to secure the IT for that, to secure the operations, and also to get the data from satellites. Most of that could be done also from home, but a lot of things still we needed people on site, and it is important, as the comment was, it is to have a resilient society. It is important that we are using all of these channels, and therefore to use these channels, we, ESA, the space community, have to secure these.
Thank you, Jan. We got another question from our public, and it's more, I would like to ask this question to Joseph. If you can, I can see him. If you can turn on his, hello, Joseph again. The question we received is how new space economy will adapt to the new landscape. What can we do on our side?
Thank you, Donatella. I think this is something that worries me a bit, because the new space economy is the fuel, is the fire in our innovation process, and they are delivering extremely innovative processes, and they are very bubbly, a very active community. Jan, the Director General of ESA, was just mentioning before motivation, and I see a lot of motivated people who want to come with their bright ideas. We see them, we hear them, we feel them, and there's a lot happening. I'm a bit worried though, with COVID and the lockdowns, that those young companies, sometimes 2 people, sometimes 5 people, sometimes 10 people, that they are not flourishing, and they cannot develop their ideas because they cannot interact, they cannot brainstorm, they cannot get access to money, which of course is now diverted maybe in other domains. And this for me is something that I hope the COVID crisis will not result in, that this innovation, that this motivation of these people is hampered. In fact, what we are trying to do at ESA, and this is something I'm discussing with my Director General and with my colleagues, is to really stimulate this community. We have every year in ESA what we call a FEE week. A FEE week is a week where innovation comes together, disruptive innovation. We have an event planned in September again, This year we will find a new way, a disruptive way of doing it, because it may be impossible to travel for key people to Italy in this case. We will invent a new way, a very disruptive way of getting these thoughts together and stimulate these people and motivate them. And that's exactly what Jan was saying before. Motivation, I think, is key. And we have to, despite all the hardship which some people are facing, we have to make sure that we keep motivating these people.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Now, you mentioned the financial crisis, the support to new and small enterprises and the ability to survive to this crisis. It leads me to another question that we received from the public that I would like to ask to Alfredo Roma. How the economic downturn can be reflected into new potential financial scheme for the space sector in particular?
Well, first of all, I agree with Joseph that this pandemic will not stop the enthusiasm of those that work on space economy. Well, regarding the financial aspect, I believe the problem is not the financial capitals, because they exist. In my opinion, I believe that this capital should be moved from speculation to productive investment. We have assisted to an incredible economic crisis in 2007 as a consequence of financial speculations that was based on the derivatives product that were in practice poison title. So I believe that the financial speculation should be strongly taxed and try to move these capital to the productive investment. Among these, there are certainly the investment on space. The future project, especially space tourism or going again to the moon and or having the new space infrastructure, I think they are basically important for the future, because they have already demonstrated to us that our daily life is based on the space infrastructures, and they have improved our daily life. We couldn't have today this webinar without the space infrastructure.
This is true. This is totally true. I would like now to ask a question to Jacob, who didn't have the time to mention this point. Hi, Jacob, again. You are an activist. You are creating an awareness on the problematic, but you have also, as a community, suggesting some solution to governments in terms of financial solution. Would you like to mention somehow the green bonds?
Yes, so the issue is that we are not only fighting with virus crisis, we are also fighting with an economic crisis by now, and we are still fighting with the climate crisis. So we have to find a solution for the economic crisis and for the climate crisis, and we can't leave one of those out because we will face bigger issues if we don't treat one of those crises. So the key to treating both of those crises is a big program of bonds and other financial aids to companies and to individuals who are struggling right now. But this help shouldn't be without any rules. So there are two different ways you can pursue those kind of helps. You can do it like the German government and just give 10 billion euros to Lufthansa without any conditions, or you can do it like the French government and give also money to the French airline, but do it with conditions in line with the Paris Agreement and with strict emission reduction conditions. So that's the way to give money to to companies directly. And in general, so this is just an example for how you can pursue those bonds and so on. But in general, we already have a really good Europe-wide program for that, and in my opinion, we don't actually need any addition to that. We just need to think the Green Deal bigger. So the Green Deal is right now already working on making a more prosperous economy, and it's also able to save the economy in the future if we are struggling with it. So if we just use the Green New Deal as an opportunity, the European Green Deal as an opportunity to treat the economic crisis and also face the climate crisis in the future, we are way farther at that point than we were before. So it's actually great that we already worked that out, and we are just ready to go, and probably have to give a little more money in it to be successful, in order to be successful than before the Corona crisis. But we have a law and a bond already served on the table right now, and I think that's something we should use.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I have one last question before giving the floor to Jan for the conclusion for Paolo. Paolo, Paolo, you are very active in this moment in facing the crisis, in supporting your country in going to the next phases. Can you give us 2 or 3 key words for the reconstruction after this war?
Reconstruction. Well, that's an interesting word because we are possibly a little far from reconstruction, I'm afraid. Now, as you know, we are shifting to phase 2, as it is called in Italy. Today is the first day of the so-called reopening, which means that the end of the entire complete lockdown. And reopening is gradual, and it mainly involves some industries, but it will increase the movement of people with a lot of rules, of course, like wearing masks in public places, keeping distance, social distancing, and so on. So the fact that phase 2 is successful depends very much on compliance by the people, by respecting these rules, but also on tracing, tracking cases and their contacts and testing them. So it is really essential that the health organizations, the health system is able to comply with this goal of tracing the cases, identifying the cases as soon as possible, then identifying and tracing their contacts, isolating the contacts and the cases, and testing as many people as possible, including the health personnel. So if we are able to do that, we will be able also to avoid another wave of epidemic in phase 2 and hopefully in phase 3. It depends very much on the proportion of people who already got the infection and the proportion of people who are in some way immunized. There has been a lot of discussion about herd immunity. We don't know, in fact, how far we are from herd immunity. It's not certain that exposure to the virus leads to a permanent immunity. We are not sure. So there are many ifs. And if we are able to reach the level of herd immunity, or at least there is an exhaustion of the spread of the virus in the population, then we can talk about reconstruction. But it is a long way, and I hope it will be like after the Second World War. I mean, people have talked about motivation today. I would say motivation is certainly a key word, maybe enthusiasm. So not only money, we expect from governments, but also a kind of psychological attitude, which means the reconstruction mode, which was so helpful after the Second World War, and probably we have to use the same attitude.
Thank you very much. Before leaving the floor, we have 5 minutes left. Before leaving the floor to Jan Werner for the final conclusion, I would like to thank all the panelists for their intervention today. There is for sure a lot of food for thought. And I would like to remind to those who are following us that this is only the first webinar of a series of 5. We are waiting for you on the 20th of May for a second webinar on healthcare. And now I leave the floor to Jan for the final conclusion, and bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you very much, Donatella, and thank you very much also the other participants for participating and sharing their thoughts. So what did we hear and what did we talk about? The interesting thing was when I heard first of this webinar about COVID-19 and climate change, I said that's a challenge to put these two issues at the same time on the table. But in fact, there is something which is very similar, as I said already before, but now also coming from all the other things I heard. So for sure, we are facing two crises, COVID-19 and climate change at the same time. One is hopefully on short, the other one will be there for longer period. But it should be also clear that any challenge of any is at the same time also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for all of us. We do not have to say to the others, and they have to, and it must be, and all those, but for ourselves, these two crises are an opportunity. It's a new opportunity to understand the daily work. How can we really work in the future? And what can we take from this lockdown as a possible action for the future? For instance, less travel, maybe also less meetings, but then more intensive physical meetings, not having social distancing. It's enough if we have physical distancing, but not to have social distancing, but to work together. So I think there are values coming out of these two crises, which we can merge and which is good because then we can do better. Sustainability of our daily life. This is necessary for the climate change, but it's also necessary for our daily life as such. That means also for all diseases. And there's another word which was not used so far, but I would like to use it at the end, and this is solidarity. A lot of that was said in the past about solidarity in crisis. Unfortunately, I'm not so convinced that the solidarity is now there and will never go away. We have to see that still some people do not behaving in that fashion. I can tell you here in Germany, suddenly it was said we have no toilet paper, and the people were running to the shops buying toilet paper like hell. And somebody calculated they have to go to the toilet 180 times a day in order to use all of this toilet paper. So this is something where I felt now we don't have solidarity, but this is a chance. The crises are a chance for societal renewal, and I'm very much looking forward to be part of that. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody.